I want to start out just by sharing with you that I've been operating professionally in the diversity and inclusion space for over 20 years, and yet I still don't see sustainability. I mean, in fact, if we look at America today, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, but we are literally still protesting in the streets today. And one of the reasons I believe that's occurring is because there are some missing sustainability factors, one of which is trust. So a couple of years ago, I crafted a presentation on trust as the D&I sustainability factor. And as I was reflecting on that presentation today, I thought about it could be changed. The title could be changed. Instead of trust, the D&I sustainability factor, it could be called trust without cause, or trust, who do I run to, or trust, what is it good for? And the list could go on and on and on. When we look at trust as an image, it's important that we recognize that trust is something that must be constructed. And just as you see in this image, sometimes it takes heavy equipment to get that construction in place because it's influenced by what we see around us, it's influenced by what we do, it's influenced by who we support, both personally and politically. And the same way that trust can be constructed, it can also be deconstructed. So when we're talking about trust, let's get on the same page. I'm defining trust as a firm belief or confidence in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. And of course, we're focusing on the someones today. So when you think about trust, who is it in your life that has earned your trust? It might be a coworker, a manager, it may be a teacher, a parent, it might be a coach from years ago, but who's earned your trust and what did they do? If we were in a smaller format and we were able to share information, I'm sure some of the responses I would get would be things like this. For one, they listened. They listened to you. They had empathy for what you were going through. And they weren't just listening passively, but they were listening actively so that they could repeat back to you what it was that you were saying and feeling. Maybe the person who earned your trust did so because they encouraged you. They saw some potential in you and they worked with you to develop that potential. And when things became difficult, they shared with you, you can do this, you've got this. They gave you opportunities. Perhaps it was that coach who gave you a new position on the team or who let you be a starter in one of the key games. They walked the talk. And that's something that is so important, particularly in corporate work. Are people doing what they say they will do? Are their actions lining up with the public statements that are being made? You know, it's interesting, I did a Zoom training yesterday, and in speaking with one of the participants mentioned, or this particular participant mentioned that her organization had also put out one of the statements in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, et cetera. But then when you look around that particular organization, you don't see Black lives in key level positions. So do we really support? Do we really believe that Black lives matter? Or are we just jumping on the bandwagon to say what's politically correct nowadays? And then another thing that people who earn our trust do is they support us. I'm sure some of you would say, this is an individual that supported me through good times and bad times. They were a sponsor for me. They helped me obtain opportunities and get the coaching and the mentoring that I need. And I'm sure there are other things that could be added to the list as well. But we know how to identify people that we trust. Stephen M.R. Covey, the son of the most famous Stephen Covey, has written a book, and he wrote this book several years ago, but it's still very timely today. The book is called The Speed of Trust, but in the book he talks about the 5 waves of trust. And Covey says that just as a drop of water in a pond causes a ripple effect from the center, trust ripples out from the center as well. And in the center, when we're talking about the waves of trust, we see self. What ripples out next, because we interact with people, is relationship trust. Because these relationships take place within organizations, whether they be corporate, civic organizations, nonprofits, whatever, there's organizational trust. Because these organizations exist in the marketplace, there's market trust. And because the marketplace is a microcosm of society, there is also societal trust. So let's take a look at these 5 waves of trust. Self-trust is your credibility. Do you say what you mean and mean what you say? Are you a trustworthy person? Can people depend on you? Do you exemplify that definition of trust that we just took a look at? The next level is relationship trust. Relationship trust is your behavior. What are the things that you do to endear someone to you in a trusting way? Organization trust is the alignment in the organization. Do the practices match the values, the mission, the vision? Market trust would be your organization's reputation. And societal trust, are you making contributions in the world? Now, in the time we have allotted, we cannot go into detail on all of these levels of trust, but the 2 most important ones, and the ones that I will give you some level of detail on today, would be self-trust and relationship trust. Self-trust, your credibility, is a function of 2 things. It's a function of character and competence. The tree, thanks to Edgar Schein, professor at MIT, is often used in organizational development terms to represent an organization because the tree, like an organization, is a living, breathing organism. And so without going into a lot of detail on that, let me just say that when we're talking about trust, I'm using this exact same metaphor of the tree. And when we talk about the cores of credibility, self-trust, we said, is based on character and competence. Character is like the roots of the tree. Your character is something that people don't see. They see evidence of it, but they don't actually see this thing called character. So like the roots of the tree, it's hidden, it's underground, it goes deep, and it nourishes your competence. The competence would be equivalent to the leaves and the branches. What are the things in the leaves and the branches? What are the policies, the practices, the procedures, the processes, the systems, the statements that we make, the results that we get? That all goes into the leaves and the branches. But it doesn't stop there, because your character is based on intent and integrity. Many times our intent does not match the impact of our behaviors. You may mean to do well. You may mean to provide equal opportunities for everyone, but the impact may not be the same because we have unconscious biases. You don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know me, you don't know how to treat me. So intent is part of character, as well as integrity. Do you live up to your word, and can we see evidence of that? So I want to share with you just some questions that you can ask yourself to sort of gauge, where is your self-trust? For example, integrity. Do I genuinely try to be honest in all my interactions with others? It may seem like a simple question, but for a lot of us, it really goes deeper than that. Many times we find that the perception, whether it's real or not, the perception is that leaders today say one thing and do another. They give us misinformation or only bits and pieces of information. So they're not genuinely trying to be honest in all of their interactions. Another question that gets at integrity: am I open to the possibility of learning new truths that may cause me to rethink issues or even redefine my values? This is very pertinent today because there are lots of things that people of color have been saying in the world as well as in the organizations where they work with respect to how they're viewed, how they're treated. And many times that was falling on deaf ears. People would feel as if it can't possibly be as bad as you're saying. Well, now in this day and age of cameras and our phones and being able to actually document some of these things, people are getting a new reality. So are you open to learning the new truths that racism is still alive and well today, and it's impacting how we interact from a diversity and inclusion perspective? Are you willing to rethink issues and redefine your values? And then another question around integrity is, am I able to consistently make and keep commitments to myself? You have to start with self. And it's as simple as, if you schedule time off, take time off. If you say you're attending an event or a meeting, go to that event or that meeting. Now let's look at intent. Intent looks at how often do I discount what someone says because I am suspicious about that person's intent. What kind of tax am I paying? And by tax, Covey refers to the fact that in a low trust organization, you're paying a tax because in a low trust organization, your speed is low, which makes your cost high. In a high trust organization, you get paid a dividend because your speed to action is high and your costs are low. So what kind of tax am I paying? Because people question intent. And lastly, what can I do to improve and better communicate my intent? Now, I said that it's also about competence. So when we think about competence, there are some factors that go into that as well. One is capabilities, and the other would be results. We have to take a look at capabilities and results also. With capabilities, you can ask yourself questions like, what capabilities do I have that make me credible and that inspire the trust and confidence of others? So what is it that I'm actually capable of? And sometimes we don't have confidence. So we go into a position believing that this is outside of my ability. But even if you don't believe in yourself, believe in the people who gave you that opportunity. You are capable of doing so much more than you give yourself credit for. So what capabilities do I have? And how am I going to use those capabilities to inspire trust and confidence in others? Another question is, what experience have I had or not had in developing capabilities that affects the confidence I have in myself? Research tells us that particularly when it comes to women, confidence is the #1 characteristic that women leaders need. So what level of confidence do you have? And lastly, what is my attitude and approach toward improving my current capabilities and gaining new ones? Are you open to continuous improvement? Or do you believe that you've already reached that pinnacle? We shift our attention to results. What kind of results am I currently producing, and do they increase or diminish my personal credibility? So are you getting the results that you set? Are you hitting expectations, meeting the marks, meeting the deadlines? Because if not, it calls your competence into question, and your competence then impacts your self-trust. If I were considering hiring someone, to what extent would that person's record and current performance impact my decision? And does my performance inspire confidence and trust? So these are some of the things that we need to look at when we're building self-trust. Now, again, all of these things come together. We tend to spend much more time focused on competence than we do on character. Most people believe that they are good people and they do the right things. But again, you don't know what you don't know. And you may have good intent, but you don't know how that intent is impacting other people. So I would suggest that while we still focus on competence, we start taking a look at the character of ourselves as well as the character of those around us, because we are judged by the company that we keep. If we move to relationship trust, the traditional business formula says you have a business strategy, you execute on that strategy, and you get results. And in many organizations, that seems to be working just fine. However, when we take trust into consideration, we change that business formula just a little bit, because trust is a hidden variable. And what we learn is that strategy times execution times trust is what gives us results. So for example, I know many of your organizations do employee surveys. You want to see some of them employee satisfaction, employee engagement, but you do employee surveys. And it's been my experience in over 20 years of consulting work that trust tends to be low in most organizations. So again, if there's no trust, then you have to question, to what extent are we really executing on that strategy? Because if I'm not trusting either the strategy or not trusting the people behind it, my execution may not be all that it should be, which means the results may not be all that they should be. And there are things that happen in the organization that erode trust, lack of accurate information. So we do understand that you cannot just divulge all information to all employees, but sometimes we carry this thing of need to know basis just a little too far. And sometimes because of relationships that we have with some people, they get good, accurate information. But if we lack a relationship with others, then those others miss out on receiving that same information. Again, it may not be an issue of intent. You don't intend to inform some people differently than other people. It just happens based on relationship. but it's one of the things that erodes trust. Breaking commitments erodes trust. Breaking commitments is one of those things where it may be outside of your control. Maybe we've got budgetary constraints. Maybe I thought I was going to be able to give you that position. But many times people come into the organization believing that they're going to be on a certain trajectory. And they're told that if they follow these steps, do what they're supposed to do, perform well, that they can have certain advancements and advantages. And many times, for various reasons, that doesn't happen. Well, in a relationship, people are less concerned with the fact or the reasons why it didn't happen and more concerned with the fact that it did not happen. Unfair treatment is something else that erodes trust. Unfair treatment, we have to get away from this thing of saying that we want to treat people equally. We're not trying to be equal when it comes to diversity. We're trying to be equitable when it comes to diversity. So what do I mean by that? Imagine in your mind that there's a fence built and people need to see over the fence. If one person is tall enough to see over the fence and another person is not, treating them equally would give each of them a box to stand on. Treating them equitably gives the person who's too short the box to stand on. And now that person can see over the fence. Well, you don't have to give a box to the person who can already see over the fence, so we don't have to treat them equally. But we do have to have good understanding and explanation, because the person who doesn't receive the box is probably going to come to you and say, the other employee got a box, why didn't I? And we need to be able to explain to them that in order to get everyone's full potential, we need to be equitable. Give you a sidebar conversation. I have 2 sons, and my oldest son was very much interested in computers and reading and writing and creativity and things along those lines. And it worked out very well for him career-wise, because he now lives in Hollywood and writes for television and movies. So that worked out well for him. The second son was very much interested in active, creative kinds of things, energetic things. You know, he played every sport that there was, and that was just his passion. So if it worked out well for him as well, no, he's not in professional sports, but he's used some of that in terms of his marketing career. So with the 2 of them, as they were growing up, if I needed to discipline them, if I said, you can't go outside today, the oldest son probably could care less, because he wasn't going outside anyway. He was going to stay inside and write or read or do something on the computer. The younger son probably would have felt like the world is coming to an end, because going outside and playing sports was his life. What I would have to do is I would need to say to the older son, no computer games for you today, and to the younger son, no outside today. The punishment was not equal, but it was equitable, and it got me the same result. Moving down the list, micromanaging. When you trust people, you don't need to stand over them and make sure they get the job done. You don't need to check and recheck. You don't need to question what they're doing and how they're doing. McKinsey & Company did a survey in 2018, and they found that when they looked at some microaggressions, and micromanaging is a microaggression, when they looked at them, they found that women experience microaggressions more than men, and they found that Black women experience microaggressions, things like being asked to continually prove their competence, or being questioned in their area of expertise, or being addressed in less than professional ways, things along those lines. Black women, more than any other ethnic group surveyed, experience more of these microaggressions. That's an indicator of inconsistency, which is the next thing on the list that erodes trust. When people are inconsistent, either inconsistent with respect to how they treat you or inconsistent across the team, trust is eroded. And then many times people spin the truth. They don't want to tell us the real reason why we may not have received a promotion, a training opportunity, or something along those lines. And so instead, what ends up happening is they get this version of the truth. These are all things that erode relationship trust. And Mahatma Gandhi said, the moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything he does becomes tainted. So here we are. There's been some suspicion because of some of the things on that list that I just shared. And what happens as a result of that, now you come along and you make this statement about which groups we support. You make statements about diversity and inclusion training taking place in the organization. You talk about setting up employee resource groups and other things, and your employees are questioning the motive behind all of that. So they're not fully bought in, and it's not fully taking root the way it should, and you don't have sustainability. We all are playing a part in this. So the little person that you see, this little orange person, is sort of, could be the target. And there are other people around this target that are guilty of certain things. Guilty is a strong word, and I use it intentionally. So you have an offender, an enabler, a bystander, and an upstander. The offender is that person who knowingly engages in discriminatory or disempowering acts. They know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Then you have an enabler. An enabler directly or indirectly supports the offender and benefits from their actions. So I may not be the person who's actually causing that particular event, but I get benefit from it happening, so I stand back and I allow it to take place. That's similar to a bystander. A bystander may not necessarily be benefiting from it, but they look away and they do nothing to support the victim or the target. And so it looks like they're supporting the offender. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but their actions don't do anything to intervene. And then you have the upstander. The upstander is the person who intervenes to help and support victims, even at great personal risk. So you have to ask yourself sometimes, which role do I play? Because you're playing one of them if you're in the organization. At some times you might be the target. At other times you might be the offender. And then there may be times when, depending on the situation, the people involved, the cause, you might be the upstander, fighting for the rights of other people. But we all play roles. And so when you play the role of anything but upstander, other people are observing you. And that gets in the way of the relationship trust, because they see you either offending or they see you standing by, enabling or doing nothing. Another quote, people don't change because they're educated and motivated. They change because the cultures that they are part of begin to call them to new behaviors. This is really what needs to take place. We can put people through all kinds of town hall meetings, all kinds of training interventions. We can coach them. There are all kinds of things, rallies. All of those things are necessary, but by themselves, they're not sufficient. Until the culture of the organization becomes such that people are called out on the bad behaviors and given opportunities and incentives to perform the new behaviors, nothing much is going to change. So there's so much more that we could talk about with self-trust as well as relationship trust that time won't allow. And I want to give you just a quick overview of the other waves of trust. We have organization trust, market trust, and societal trust. Organization trust, some examples of that would be the trust gets eroded if people manipulate the facts, if they withhold information, resist new ideas, or cover up mistakes. Market trust is your brand or reputation. It impacts how people feel about the organization. It impacts views on safety and value. If you work in an environment where you are putting your physical self at risk and you can't trust the people around you, you're using energy to try to play this mental chess game in your head to keep yourself working and knowing who you can trust and who you can't, and you're not totally focused on the job at hand. Market trust impacts if the public uses your services, and it impacts the funding that you receive. And then societal trust is social responsibility. Is it accessible to everyone? Meaning your product, your service, etc. Is it affordable for everyone? Innovative, environmentally conscious, and cost-effective. Those are some of the things that would come under societal trust. Now, back when I defined trust, I talked about its confidence. It's a firm belief or confidence. And the three key things were reliability, truth, and someone's ability to perform. So I have a question for you. And again, because we're not able to be interactive, you are not able to answer this question for me, but I want to pose the question and then I will answer it for you. The question of the day is, what role does trust play in the circumstances surrounding people of color dying from COVID-19 at higher rates than whites? What role does trust play in the circumstances surrounding the incidents of police brutality against Black Americans? We really need to look deep in order to find the answers to these questions. Let's start with the COVID-19. I believe that organizations, no matter what type of organization you work for, your organization plays a role in Blacks and other people of color dying at higher rates from COVID-19 than whites. And you may question how that's possible. You know, if we're doing all that we can to stay safe, and if we're not even in the health industry or the pharmaceutical industry, how are we playing a role in that? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because you see, all companies hire. And depending on who you hire and what positions you put them in, and then how you pay them, that's a factor in it. Some people have positions where they're not able to stay at home and work from home. They have no choice but to go out and work. And many times we find people of color in those lower level positions. They're in positions where there's a pay gap. We know that men get paid more than women to do the same job at the same level. But we rarely take the time to break down the demographics around ethnicity within those groups. And it might interest you, if you don't already know, to know that white women get paid more than Black women get paid more than Latina women. Asian women tend to be more in the category around with the white women. So you might be doing the same job as someone else, but not getting paid to the same level, or you might be in a lower paying job. That limits where you're able to live. And even though redlining is illegal, redlining does in some cases still take place. For those who don't know, redlining was a process that was used years ago when banks would actually draw a red line around certain areas on their maps, and they would not provide funding in those areas. So they tended to be areas where the houses cost less and where people of color live. So people of color were not able to purchase homes. They were not able to move into more affluent neighborhoods. And more affluent neighborhoods, not only do they have grocery stores that provide better produce, but they also have restaurants that give you options other than fast food. So when you live in better neighborhoods, you're able to eat better and you're able to maintain your health. Also, when you're paid better, you're able to have, in many instances, some discretionary money that might allow you to get involved in recreational activities or allow you to join a gym. So even though we might say, well, some of the extenuating factors are other health risks that people of color have, those health risks don't just materialize out of nowhere. They materialize because people aren't able to eat healthily. They're not able to eat healthily because of the neighborhoods in which they live. They have to live in those neighborhoods because they're not paid enough to be able to live other places. And they're not paid enough to live in other places because they're not being given the opportunities to have certain jobs or be paid at the same rates as some of their counterparts. The incident of police brutality against Black Americans. I'm sure if I gave you the opportunity to answer this question, you would tell me that it goes back to the confidence in reliability, truth, and ability. How reliable are the police in the Black community? If you call them, they don't come. If sometimes they come, and again, I am not painting a brush across all police officers. We know that the majority of police officers in this country do their jobs, they do it well, they uphold the oaths that they take to go into office. Unfortunately, we're having to focus on the few that we've seen who don't. So in that case, are police officers consistently performing the same way when they go to various neighborhoods? Are they telling truth, or are they making up stories to cover bad actions that they're involved in? And do they have the proper training to be able to interact with people on the same level? So again, the police department hires. Who are they hiring? What positions are they placing them in? What kind of training are they giving? Are they overlooking bad behavior? So many of the officers that have been called into question lately, their records indicate that this is not the first time they've been in trouble. So we find ourselves in a situation where, as I said, employers have a major role to play. No, you may not be the offender but are you Mr. or Miss Employer? Are you an enabler? Are you a bystander? Or are you an upstander? I've talked a lot about trust, eroding trust, and some of the negative things that come from it. And again, I want to highlight the fact that in most corporations around America today, we do have good leaders. Not all, but that's true of anything. They're good leaders, they're good managers. People are doing their best to lead in ways that are equitable for all people. The same true with our police forces across America. But we do have to concentrate on the fact that there are some bad apples that are spoiling things. And this is not just a matter of nice to have or the socially responsible thing to do. This comes down to an issue of life or death. So let's talk about ways that we can improve trust, and then I'll wrap up. Covey in his book gives us these 13 ways that you can establish trust. Not going to go into detail, obviously, on all of them. I do want to point out that I've color-coded them for a reason. So it can link back to some of the things that we've already discussed. So for example, the first 5 that you see in black, those all go back to character. The next 5 that you see in green, those relate to competence. And then the last 3 are a mixture. So again, we're looking at establishing trust is a combination of beginning with self-trust, and it will ripple out from there. And you've got to work on your character by having straight talk, demonstrating respect across the board, being transparent, righting wrongs when you're aware of them, and searching deep into your own unconscious biases. Make the unconscious conscious so that when you see something, you recognize it as a wrong so that you can make it right. And then showing loyalty. We also have deliver results. That's a competence area. Are you getting results? Not just the performance results that the organization demands from your position, but are you getting the results with your people? Are they following you because they have to, because your title says so? Or are they following you because you are growing them and developing them and you're committed to them and to the company vision? Are you working on getting better, confronting reality, clarifying expectations, practicing accountability? Do you have an accountability partner in the organization? Who holds you accountable? Who knows you well enough, and who do you trust well enough that they can say, you know, that statement that you made really was a little sexist, or your actions really are leaving out people in, whether you call it the LGBTQ plus community or you call it the GSM community, but are you really recognizing some of the struggles that that community faces in the workplace? And have you really done all that you can do to increase the number of people with disabilities that are on your team? You have to have someone who holds you accountable. And then the last 3, listen first and listen most. You know, there's that cliche about you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Make sure you're using those ears to listen and listen with empathy. Keep your commitments and extend your trust. Lastly, I want to leave you with the quote from this wonderfully insightful woman who is just brilliant by the name of Dr. Linda G. Wiley. And I want to leave you with the thought that when it comes to diversity and inclusion, you can have state-of-the-art training programs, policies, systems, and all kinds of interventions. But without trust, you have no sustainability. So whereas we are in this place now of reevaluating who we are as people, who we are as organizations, who we are as a country, a nation, now is the time really for us to step up and think about trust in a totally new way. And unless you get your trust house in order, your diversity and inclusion house will not stand. I thank you for your time and attention. I believe we have a couple of minutes in case anyone would like to ask any questions. And again, I apologize for the technical difficulties up front.
Dr. Wiley,
I have a comment where someone says, I have no questions, but I'm standing and clapping. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Dr. Wiley, we don't have any questions coming through the Q&A right now, but I would like to ask, what would be a way to begin that high level of trust in the organization?
It really has to begin with self. People really need to take an evaluation of themselves. We really need to stop and think about, what am I doing or not doing? And so how do I demonstrate that I am a trustworthy person? Look at your character. Take some 360 assessments, ask some coworkers, some peers, some family members. Really get in touch with your character, number one, and then also look at your competence, because those cores of credibility are key. If people don't trust you, they won't follow you, and they will question everything that you do. So even when you're trying to do something good, like advance certain people, there are going to be questions. People are going to say, did that person get that position just because they are and fill in the blank for any demographic, because people don't trust. So everyone needs to begin with self-trust. And from self-trust, you go to the relationship trust. If we have enough trusting relationships, then the organization, the marketing, the societal, those levels of trust will take care of themselves.
Thank you, thank you. One more question before we let you out of here. When a person are having issues at their organization, how do they bring those issues up without feeling like they're attacking someone or attacking the organization?
So one of the things that I find, that's a really good question. I find that asking questions like, so now with all the stuff that's going on in the world, some of my white colleagues and white friends will just say, do you mind if I ask you some questions? That's a great starter. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to support you. Do you mind if I ask you some questions? I think we first have to begin with humility. Many times we approach these situations from an angry or arrogant or defiant standpoint, and that doesn't get you anywhere. So most people, even people who feel as if they are suffering, are willing to share if you approach it the right way. So just ask permission, build relationships. And if you don't know what to ask, that's okay too. You can approach someone by saying, I don't know what to ask, but I want to be a source of support. So is there anything that I can do for you, or what can I do? And then you've got to be willing to be honest and let them know if that's something that you can do and will do. But we really have to one-on-one, just one-on-one, start these conversations. When we try to do things in large groups, it can be intimidating for some. You have introverts who may not necessarily want to speak out and share in front of a large group. So just start one-on-one. If you're leading a team, go to your individuals one-on-one, not just the people of color. Certainly that's sort of our focus right now, but there are whites who join forces with the people of color. There are whites who are hurting just as bad by the inequities that they see going on. And there are whites who want to step in and help, and they don't know how. So if you're a leader in an organization, go one-on-one to each of your folks and just check in. 2 great questions. How are you feeling? What do you need? How are you feeling? What do you need? And once you get a sense of that from the individuals, then maybe you can pull people together for a group session and do some of the things that you might need to do to help everyone feel better.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Wiley. One of the questions that came through the chat, tons of questions come through now. We'll try to get them to you later. But one of the questions, a couple of people asked and called and texted about, will you be able to share your slides with the group attending here today? A couple of people
Sure,
asked.
no problem. I will make my slides available to the chamber. And so I will allow you guys then, since you have the list of registrants and all of that, you can make them available to everyone if you like, or you can just go ahead and respond to people's requests. I'll also point out that my information is on the screen now. So if I was not able to answer your question, if you'd like more information, if you'd like for Turning Point Leadership Group to perhaps come and do a workshop similar to this in your organization, whatever your need might be, if you reach out to me, give me a few days. It might take me a minute to get through them all, but if you reach out to me, I will do my best to answer your questions and fulfill whatever your need happens to be. So again, I thank all of you who have been here listening. I thank you for the efforts that you're making to help with this particular issue. And I wish you all the best in your careers. Enjoy the rest of Diversify 2020.